Hello and welcome to week 2 of Anxiety Toolbox. If you haven't done so already, pause the recording now and access the student workbook. We'll be using that today. Hopefully you've had about a week or so to practice some of what we went over in week 1. This workshop really is designed to kind of build on itself that way. So having about a week's worth of practice in between sessions is ideal. We're going to start off today by practicing some deep breathing, just as we learned to do in week 1. Remember, this skill is about bringing some regulation to our breathing, because that's going to have some calming effects on our anxiety. And the way we practice this is essentially counting our breaths. As you might recall, it's 4 seconds on the in-breath, pausing for 2 seconds, then exhaling for 4 seconds, and holding for 2 seconds, and then repeating that. Another important thing to remember is that we want to be doing abdominal breathing. And so that's why last week I asked you to put a hand on your chest and another hand on your abdomen. When we're breathing with our abdomen, our bottom hand should be moving and our top hand should be still. So you can feel free to use your hands today or not, depending on whatever you're comfortable with. Lastly, we want to remember to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. So I'll lead us through a few cycles of this, and then we can practice silently for a minute or two. Maybe a good place to start actually would be to just check in with what your anxiety level is right now. And if you have a pen and paper handy, you might want to jot down the level of anxiety you're experiencing from 0 to 10, with 0 being no anxiety at all and 10 being the highest amount of anxiety. And so when you're ready, you can begin by taking a deep breath in through the nose for 4 seconds, 2, 3, 4, pause for 2 seconds, and then out for 4 seconds. Pause for 2 seconds, in for 4 seconds. And just count silently to yourself, and we'll go through a couple of cycles of this. You can play around with the timing if extending the breath from 4 seconds to 5 seconds feels comfortable. Feel free to do that. And then maybe one final cycle. Okay, so why don't we take a moment to check in with our level of anxiety now, and then jot down the number corresponding to where it's at. And maybe you've noticed a shift, and maybe not, if that's okay. So why don't we move on to today's topics. Today we'll start by quickly reviewing the CBT model that we introduced last week, and we'll also talk about the home practice that you completed between last week and today. Next, we'll shift into focusing on how the ways in which we think about things can impact our anxiety. We'll discuss different styles of unhelpful thinking that we all engage in from time to time, as well as what tends to trigger this kind of thinking and how it relates to our anxiety. We'll conclude by practicing a new relaxation exercise and talking about what you can practice between now and next week. Last week, I introduced the CBT model for anxiety, and I used the cross-sectional formulation depicted here to demonstrate that the physical sensations, cognitions or thoughts, behaviors, and emotions all kind of interact with one another to contribute to the experience of anxiety. And understanding these different components to our experience of anxiety and how they kind of interact with one another is really foundational to using a CBT approach to working with anxiety, which is why we spend so much time on it. So why don't we just review the example that we discussed last week, just to kind of go over and remind ourselves about the model. So in this example, in this situation, a student was invited to a party and didn't know this person very well and felt anxious about going. So we see that the physical sensations were present, such as heart racing, tightness in chest, shallow breathing. These are really common physical responses to anxiety. Next is the cognitive anxiety symptom cluster, which is another word for thoughts, which can take the form of language or images, by the way, but we'll focus on the language for now. In this example, this person had the thought, I won't know anyone at this party and will feel awkward. No one will like me because I'm so socially awkward. I won't have fun, but if I say no, this person won't like me and I won't make any friends. So a lot of anxious thoughts are present here. Next is the behavioral symptom cluster. And so this is basically what you did in the situation. And in this example, this person's first instinct was to say no, but instead said they'll think about it, and ended up never getting back to this person who invited them and didn't end up going to the party. Emotionally, anxiety, fear, shame, and loneliness were present. And the way I'd like to conclude here is just to remind you that the order I just went through is kind of arbitrary, and for different people in different situations, the experience of anxiety will involve a different kind of combinations of these different symptom areas. For example, if we take a look down at the behavior symptoms, we can identify some avoidance behavior here, which is actually quite common when we're experiencing anxiety. So they didn't give a direct answer, they avoided the person, and then they ended up avoiding the party altogether. And so we can see how that behavior could impact someone's emotions, or we could see how it could have an influence on the person's thoughts, which then could impact the person's emotional experience, which then could lead to certain physical sensations all the way at the top now. And then the experience of those physical sensations might impact their behavior, and then so on. And so just keep that in mind, that each of these relate to each other, and there's really a lot of different ways that they can kind of combine and influence one another. So hopefully for your home practice, you had a chance to complete at least one of these. If you didn't get a chance to, feel free to pause the video and complete one now. And what I'd like to do is, normally at this point we would all kind of share our experiences in completing these cross-sectional formulations and maybe troubleshoot any kind of problems that came up along the way. But of course, that's not an option in this format. So instead, what I'll do is just go over a few common challenges that people tend to run into when doing this kind of work, and some recommendations for each of them. So challenge number one is what happens if you don't remember what happened? And the recommendation here is just to try to remember to take some notes as soon as possible after the event happened. You can use your phone for this if you like. It's probably handy most of the time. So that's a recommendation there, is just to get in the habit of kind of jotting down some of these things as soon as you can after it happened, and that'll just help you kind of remember in the greatest amount of detail. Challenge number 2 is maybe you couldn't think of anything to put in any given section here. And the recommendation here is just to take a minute to think about how you might feel, think, or act in this situation. You can start with hypotheticals and work from there. The key is just to kind of get in the practice of using the model at the beginning. And you can also refer to the physical symptoms section page on page 10 in the workbook and the feelings wheel on page 11 for examples. Sometimes lists like these can offer us some useful language, and especially when we're not used to identifying and naming our physical sensations and emotions. The next challenge is maybe you felt too anxious to write down or even think about what happened. And the recommendation here is to practice that deep breathing before you do it, and remind yourself why you want to do this in the first place. For example, you might remind yourself that this is something that's ultimately good for your mental health, and that you'll do it even though it's hard. So remember, the CBT model is a fundamental component of understanding anxiety, and the skills that we cover in this workshop are all built on this foundation. And in terms of other home practice, remember you are also invited to practice the deep breathing and to implement at least one sleep hygiene tip. And so if you were able to do any of this, great job, and keep it up. Now we're going to transition into further exploring our anxious thought processes. Now that we've looked at the interactions between thoughts, emotions, and feelings, let's focus on thoughts. Our thoughts can be conscious, intentional, or purposeful, like when you're purposefully working on a homework assignment and thinking about the content. Or our thoughts can be automatic, like a reflex. Automatic thoughts are the thoughts or images that automatically pop into our heads. We don't choose for them to happen, they just do. For example, you may be purposefully working on your homework when the automatic thought pops up that you suddenly need to clean your room, or text a friend, or call your mom back. These automatic thoughts can be helpful or unhelpful. For example, if you're working on that homework assignment and you have the thought, I need to go to the bathroom, that's helpful. But if the automatic thoughts distract you from what you're trying to accomplish and you can't refocus on your homework, then that's not so helpful. Sometimes automatic thoughts can impact the way that we feel or further think about things. We're going to hone in on these automatic thoughts, particularly the unhelpful ones, because this is where we can start to see some of the difficulties when it comes to anxiety. Let's talk about some examples of automatic thoughts and feelings and that might go with them. Imagine you notice that your heart rate has accelerated. You may have the thought, my heart is racing, I must be having a panic attack. Or you may have the thought, my heart is racing, I'm so excited. Can you see how the same internal experience or stimulus, in this case heart racing, can provoke different thoughts? What feelings do you think you would have if you had the thought, my heart is racing, I must be having a panic attack? Okay. Now, what feelings do you think you would have if you had the thought, my heart is racing, I'm so excited? Can you see how different thoughts can provoke different feelings? Okay, here's another example. This time, our thoughts are in response to an external stimulus. Imagine you're walking on campus and someone doesn't acknowledge you when you say hello. You might have the thought, they must not like me. Or you have the thought, maybe they didn't hear me. Can you see how having these two different thoughts might elicit different emotional responses? You might feel hurt if you think they didn't like you, or you might brush it off if you think they didn't hear you. Let's consider the example situation from last week on page 8. The example of being invited to the party. The person had the thought, "No one will like me because I'm so socially awkward." Consider how this thought could impact this person's emotions and behaviors. All right, so considering everything we've just talked about, let's take a look at your own anxiety-provoking situation from the homework assignments. Remember, we talked about how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors all interact. Well, automatic thoughts can impact the way that we feel or further think about things. Taking a look at your homework, is it possible that any of the thoughts listed were unhelpful, automatic thoughts? Feel free to pause this video, by the way, if you need to. Take a moment now to identify and highlight any unhelpful automatic thoughts that you notice in your personal cross-sectional formulation. As we keep practicing these tools and increasing your awareness, you may notice some patterns in your thoughts. Some types of thoughts happen more often than others. Let's talk about common patterns people often experience. When we think about automatic thoughts, we can often place them into a number of common categories or styles of thinking that everyone engages in. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, not just people who struggle with anxiety. These ways of thinking are so common, in fact, that we have names for them. One of the most commonly used styles of thinking is what we call catastrophizing. This is when your thoughts snowball. For example, you start with the thought, "I'm going to fail this test," which leads to the thought, "If I fail this test, I'll fail the class. And then I'll fail out of Drexel and never graduate. And then I'll never get a job. And finally, I'll be homeless and unable to support myself." Notice how that went down pretty quickly. Maybe that sounds a little familiar. So that was just one example of many. Let's take a look at each of these unhelpful thinking styles. You can find them on page 18 of your workbook or just follow along with the image on the screen. Okay, so in the upper left-hand corner, we'll start with all or nothing thinking. This is sometimes called black and white thinking, and it basically just means thinking about things in all or nothing terms. So examples would be, if I'm not perfect, then I failed. Or either I'll do it right or I won't do it at all. Okay, next to the right is overgeneralizing. And with this unhelpful thinking style, we're seeing a pattern based on just a single event, or being overly broad in the conclusions that we draw from maybe just one piece of information. So we might say things like, everything is always rubbish, nothing good ever happens. Next, we'll take a look at mental filter. This means only paying attention to certain types of evidence. For example, we might notice our failures, but not see our successes. Next is disqualifying the positive. This is discounting the good things that have happened or that you have done for some reason or another. So, that doesn't count. Maybe, you get an A on a test, but you might immediately say, "Oh yeah, but that was easy. Everybody passed." That sort of thing. Next is jumping to conclusions. There's two key types of jumping to conclusions. First is mind reading. That's imagining that we know what others are thinking. And next is fortune telling, or predicting the future. We already talked about magnification, sometimes called catastrophizing. This is blowing things out of proportion. Next is emotional reasoning. So this is assuming that because we feel a certain way, that what we think must also be true. So, for example, I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. Next is should and must. So this is using critical words like should, must, or ought. It can make us feel guilty or like we've already failed. If we apply shoulds to other people, the result is often frustration. So, we apply it to ourselves anyway. Next is labeling, and this is assigning labels to ourselves or to other people, such as I'm a loser, I'm completely useless, and so on. And lastly is personalization. So this is blaming ourselves or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely our fault. And conversely, it could also involve blaming other people for something that was your fault. So that's just a brief kind of overview of each of these different thinking styles. So why don't we really take a minute here to look through each of these thinking styles yourself and take a little more time with it. You may want to pause the recording if you need to. And as you go through these styles of thinking, start to identify in some way, whether you start or circle it or highlight it, whatever works for you. Identify the thinking styles that you tend to use. Some of these, as I was reviewing them, may have already kind of jumped out to you. So just highlight the ones that are relevant for you. Now, this may include all of them. It may be just a few. It doesn't really matter. So again, pause the video now if you need to, and resume when you're ready. Okay, so let's practice identifying unhelpful thinking patterns by returning to the sample party situation from the first session, which we reprinted on page 19 in case you want to see it somewhere else. So what do you think are some of the unhelpful thinking styles this person may have had? Take a minute to pause the video if you need to take some time to think about that. Okay, now let's turn back to your homework assignment again. Do any of the thoughts that you wrote down in the cognitive box of the homework fit into any of these unhelpful thinking categories? Go ahead and write the unhelpful thinking style next to the corresponding thought in the cognitive box on your homework. And again, pausing if you need to and resuming when you're ready. These unhelpful thinking patterns can trigger other anxiety symptoms. As you may have already noticed, we come back to the interactions between thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and physical symptoms quite a lot, and talk about how each one impacts the other. Each of these types of symptoms, unhelpful thoughts included, can be triggers for further symptoms. So let's talk about some common triggers. And triggers can be external events, like a test, or internal stimuli, like lightheadedness or a racing heart. And these can lead to anxiety symptoms. Having one symptom can be a trigger for another symptom. For example, I just said lightheadedness, which is a symptom of anxiety, just like we talked about last week. But lightheadedness can also be a trigger for other symptoms, like different thoughts or behaviors. Understanding your triggers is important because it helps you to understand yourself better. Understanding your triggers can help you to know when you should be using your toolbox before it begins to feel overwhelming. Take a look at page 20 in your workbook. Notice there's several domains listed at the top page to help prompt you. We're going to take a look at this worksheet, learn about common triggers, and identify some of your own triggers. Keep in mind that your triggers may or may not fit into these categories. Some examples of triggers might include actual events, like being invited to a party, physical sensations, like racing heartbeat, or thoughts, like worrying about the health or safety of others. Take some time to complete this worksheet, identifying triggers that you've noticed yourself experiencing. And pause now and resume when you're ready. We're going to end today with another relaxation exercise, but this one's called progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR. But before we do this, let's take our current anxiety reading. Remember identifying on a scale of 0 to 10 where you're at with your anxiety right now. Go ahead and jot that down. So back to PMR. As a reminder, PMR is another direct way to address the fight, flight, freeze symptoms. And remember that by addressing the physical symptoms directly, you're freeing up some mental energy to address other symptoms. Progressive muscle relaxation is an exercise that reduces stress and anxiety in the body. And by having you slowly tense and then relax each muscle, this is how we go about helping to reduce some of that stress. The theory behind this exercise is that you cannot have the feeling of relaxation and warm well-being in your body at the same time that you're experiencing anxiety symptoms. These are kind of incompatible states. With practice, you'll be more aware of when you're experiencing tension, and you'll have the skills to help you relax. During this exercise, each muscle should be tensed, but not to the point of strain. Pay special attention to the feeling of tension in each muscle and the feeling of relaxation as you release the tension. If you have any injuries or pain, skip any muscle group that's impacted by that. So let's begin. So for this exercise, you can sit back, or if you're comfortable, lying down in a comfortable position. And shut your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. And start by taking a deep breath and noticing the feelings of air filling your lungs. Hold your breath for a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, and release the breath slowly and let the tension leave your body. Now take another deep breath and hold it for 1, 2, 3, and slowly release the air. Even slower now, take in another deep breath, filling your lungs and holding it for 1, 2, 3, and slowly releasing the breath. And imagine the feeling of tension leaving your body with each out-breath. We're going to begin progressively tensing and relaxing our muscles. Let's start by clenching our fists tighter and tighter. And hold this. Study the tension in your fists, wrists, and forearms as you hold them. And now let go and relax your hands. And feel the looseness in your hands and notice the contrast between the tension and the feelings of relaxation. Now bend your elbows and tense your biceps. Tense them as hard as you can and observe the feelings of tenseness there. And hold it. And then relax. Straighten your arms. Notice the feeling of relaxation in your hands and arms and shoulders. And notice how your arms feel limp and at ease. Okay, let's turn our attention to our head. Wrinkle your forehead as tight as you can. And hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then relax, and then smooth it out. Notice your eyes, squint them tighter. Feel the tension as you squint your eyes. Hold it, and then relax your eyes and let them remain gently closed. And still focusing on your head, roll your head to the right and feel the changing locus of stress, and roll it to the left. And straighten your head again, and now bring your head forward, your chin now against your chest. Feel the tension in your throat, in the back of your neck, holding this for a few more seconds. And now relaxing, allowing your head to return to a comfortable position, and let the relaxation deepen. Next, tense the muscles in your back by bringing your shoulders together behind you, and hold them tightly there, tensing as hard as you can without straining. And then keep this for a few more seconds, and then letting go and releasing the tension from your back. Just feel the tension slowly leaving your body and the new feeling of relaxation. Notice how different your body feels and just allowing it to relax even further. Now, shrug your shoulders up to your ears and hold that for about 5 seconds. And then relaxing and dropping your shoulders back and feeling the relaxation spreading throughout your neck, throat, and shoulders. And just giving your body a chance to relax now. Just feel the comfort and the heaviness. Next, breathe in and feel your lungs fill up completely with air. And hold your breath, just noticing the tension. And then exhaling. Let the air hiss out and let your chest become loose. Continue relaxing and let your breath come freely and gently. And now tighten your thighs and squeeze your thighs as hard as you can, and just holding that upper part of your legs in tension for a few more seconds, and then releasing, and to feel the difference as you let go of that. Now let's move our attention to the calves and feet. Press your toes downward, making your calves tense. Study that tension. Really notice how it feels. For a few more seconds, tensing those calves, and then relax. Now bend your toes towards your face, creating tension in your shins. Just hold that position for 4, 3, 2, and then relaxing. Okay, finally, let's tense your entire body. Tensing your feet, legs, stomach, chest, arms, head, and neck. Tense it all at the same time, as hard as you can without straining. And hold that tension in your entire body for 4, 3, 2, and relax. And feel the looseness and heaviness throughout your lower body as the relaxation deepens. Just letting go more and more, experiencing that relaxation deepening. Pay attention to that feeling of relaxation and how different it is from the feelings of tension. Beginning to wake your body up now, slowly, by just moving your muscles around. Adjust your arms and legs and stretch your muscles and open your eyes whenever you're ready. So this is the second relaxation exercise that we've done. There are many different options in the appendix in your workbook as well. You'll find that you like some more than others, and just keep practicing to find out which one best fits your style. So that concludes session 2 of Anxiety Toolbox. Between now and next week, pay attention to triggers and automatic thoughts that you experience. Write them down and continue to practice doing the simple cross-sectional formulation. Try to complete at least one before next week. Remember, it takes time to get good at using all of the tools in the Anxiety Toolbox, so just keep practicing throughout the week as much as you can. Remember, the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll begin to feel with these skills. If you don't have time to do a full body PMR, and then pick an area where you feel the most tension and practice tensing and releasing there. Next week, we're going to start to learn other ways to address these automatic thoughts. We'll also discuss grounding, sleep hygiene, and basic self-care. Okay, see you next week.